Hi everybody and welcome back to another video. So for today I'm going to be talking about my home cinema, which I've been working on throughout this year. There is actually a video for it, so it'll be at the top of your screen. Be sure to check that out if you haven't already. Recently I put two collage picture frames on the back door of my home cinema. I've had them for quite some time, but I finally managed to fill them and put them on the wall, and I kind of wasn't sure what to fill them with, you know, what kind of pictures to include. I was thinking about either memories of me within media and film, or whether it was favourite actors, favourite films. But I kind of thought to myself, when you think of film reels, you think of scenes and sequences. So I thought, you know what, I thought I'd narrow it down to some of my particular favourite film scenes, and that's the purpose of this video, and a number of others as well. I'm going to be going through at least 4 volumes of my favourite scenes in cinema history, 4 of each video. Most of these films are ones that got me into cinema in the first place, and the sequences could last from 40 seconds to 20 minutes, so they do vary, but I think it's more about personal significance on my part, but also I think in terms of production, in terms of acting, a number of other different things. And because you can't really choose a favourite scene, I just decided to do it in a alphabetical order, so that's how it's going to be structured anyway. And just a little disclaimer, as I've already said, I'm going to be talking about specific film scenes. There will be spoilers involved, so if you haven't seen a particular film, you can just, you know, skip to the next one, or better yet, go and watch that film and then come back and watch this one. Anyway, without further ado, this is a discussion on
a few of my favourite things.
Well, not quite like that, but my favourite film scenes. So as you know, this is a very recent one, and why I've chosen to include this among my favourite scenes of all time is because just how everything was done, that just kind of, it was building up to it. It was 22 films and over 10 years in the making, and it all came to that point where everyone kind of came together, and it was just the emotion and the excitement, something that hasn't really been done in film all that often. And it's come at a point when hope seems to have been restored again, after Thanos snapped his fingers in Infinity War, where the vast majority of the Avengers are deteriorated, as well as 50% of all life in that universe. After the scheme by the remaining Avengers, it seemed successful until past Thanos travelled into the future, and it seemed like it was almost impossible again. However though, in an absolute sheer of awesomeness, the Avengers all returned, and it was just the time and the moment where we, the audience, were given that time to respond to seeing them all return again. And I guess, you know, in terms of Thanos as well, what kind of enemies he was dealing with. It was just one of those moments in cinema where you just couldn't stop smiling. Most people in the cinema almost erupted, where it almost went from an auditorium into a sports stadium where there were people cheering. I think there was one audience member who was cheering at one particular point in that particular scene, and of course that was when Cap ended up bringing the hammer back, and then he said Avengers assemble, and then everyone started cheering, and then they charged. So if that isn't the perfect nerdgasm, yes, that is a word for comic book fans, then I don't really know what else is. It was just the music that was building up the emotion and building up the comeback, whereas when you've seen a lot of charged scenes, there is a bit of dialogue, whereas there's not really anything. It's just the body language of the characters, it's the shots, it's the music, it's just all of that. It's poetry where you don't have to talk to be able to create something emotional and something engaging that is so critical to the story and how the audience watch it. And of course, who could forget, Chadwick Boseman's appearance makes the scene a lot more emotional as well. In fact, it's changed it really, obviously, because he passed away in the summer, and seeing him return and be resurrected in that sequence was a crucial, exciting moment anyway for the film, but because now obviously he's passed away, it's kind of changed that perception, where it kind of adds a bit of sadness and emotion. And to be honest, the MCU have a lot of fantastic scenes anyway, and I didn't think that awesome 360 shot in the very first Avengers film could be topped until this particular scene. Avengers Endgame was just an incredible film anyway, but that scene absolutely was the central core to every single film and every single character in those 22 films. I'm sure we'll get more Marvel films in the future in that universe, but it was the end of an era, and it was just a scene that I'll never forget. It was amazing, amazing. So again, a bit like Avengers Endgame, I've included this particular scene from more an emotional perspective rather than a technical one. The reason why I have done is because it's 10 years in the making, of the Harry Potter films, and it's something that holds dear to me, having grown up practically alongside the young actors, having loved the series anyway from start to finish. It's come at a point where it's the end of one era and the beginning of another one, which in this case is from childhood to adulthood. So the epilogue is set years after the Battle of Hogwarts, where Harry, Ron, Hermione, Ginny and even Draco are all at the King's Cross station dropping their children off going to Hogwarts. So it's already gone full circle. And as we will find out later on, is the immediate events of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. If you've not seen the play, watch it, it's very, very good. In Harry Potter there are so many unique twists and turns, and there's so many fantastic moments that I just love. But like I said earlier about the emotion, I think this one really stands out for me. I went to see the film for the first time in a cinema in Florence where I was living and working at the time. It was just that moment of, wow, you're an adult now. It was like saying goodbye to my own childhood when I used to watch Harry Potter when I was little. And that's what I think is really, really special about that particular scene and Harry Potter in general, because you grow up alongside the individual stars of the films. And it was emotional, don't get me wrong, it really, really was. It was just, you know, the end of one era and the beginning of another, saying goodbye to my childhood and saying hello to adulthood, and having done it in an environment that I'll never forget and one that I don't think will ever be topped, if I'm absolutely honest. While it wasn't my personal ultimate cinematic experience on a technical level, but on an emotional one, it probably was the best ever. It really, really was. And like I said, it'll be tough to top it. And it makes me question, actually, in the epilogue, would it have felt the same emotionally if Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Grint, Bonnie Wright, Emma Watson and Tom Felton hadn't played their characters in that sequence? Whereas if other actors in their 30s may have done it, it might not have felt the same. While it wasn't entirely convincing that they were, you know, late 30s, early 40s, it was just that emotional satisfaction from the audience perspective. I'm sure I'm speaking for a lot of people anyway, and that's why I would include the epilogue among my favourite scenes ever. I remember when the film was coming out that I knew of Tarantino and I'd watched a few of his films, but when I thought of the concept of Inglourious Basterds, I wasn't really kind of psyched to see it. When I went to the cinema to watch it, I think I was about 18 at the time, and that opening sequence of Once Upon a Time in Nazi-occupied France, when you're introduced to Christoph Waltz for the first time, and just the extraordinary dialogue and just the way it's filmed and the tension. You just knew there was tension from the very, very beginning, where you had the handshake between the two, between the farmer and Landa, played by Christoph Waltz, and he stamps his authority within there politely by putting his hat on the table, by kissing the farmer's daughter's hand, by holding her hand, just things like that, and even drinking the milk, you know, that asserts his dominance, and he's one to be intimidated by. And I think out of every sequence that Tarantino has ingeniously written over the years, I would probably say that Inglourious Basterds is probably the most creative he's probably been in terms of screenwriting, especially in this particular sequence. In fact, I'd probably go as far as to say that this is my favourite written sequence ever in a Quentin Tarantino film. Even though it's technically not my favourite Tarantino film, that might be a bit of a spoiler for a later video, so keep an eye out for that. The dialogue and the body language of the characters are very welcoming, very encouraging, but you just know there's still tension there, and you know it's just going to escalate and get bigger and bigger and bigger, and then it's just going to explode, and then the audience discover that the Jews are underneath the floorboards whom Landa is looking for. And because of the ultimatums that Landa puts forward to the farmer, he does eventually confess, and then he ends up shooting them through the floorboards. And then the young girl escapes, who Landa uniquely lets go. Because it's set in a very peaceful French countryside during the Second World War, it just goes to show that it was humanity who destroyed the beauty of nature in such a beautiful and peaceful area. I mean, the camera work was amazing, but I particularly loved the script, especially when they were talking about the rats and the world that they live in, talking about what his mission is and what the farmer's thinking and all those things. But it makes you go into the characters' minds, and that's what I think is so good about Tarantino, because he uses something that's almost a different concept and a different idea, and then puts it together to make it work. The use of Tarantino's dialogue with the rats and the Jews are relevant because that's how a Nazi would think. I mean, Tarantino's done it in a number of different scenes where he's compared the concepts and ideology of things in relation to the characters and their situations in his films. And even the just 20 minutes already established Christoph Waltz as an immediate superstar anyway. And obviously he went to go on and win the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor for Inglourious Basterds, and then he did for Django as well 3 years later. So I think because he was calm and polite, but also quite intimidating, and that was Landa to a T in that particular sequence. And why I've chosen this particular scene from Inglourious Basterds is because it's just the screenwriting, and it's just the tension, and it's just the symbolism of a lot of things in it as well. So Inglourious Basterds, absolutely fantastic film. If you haven't seen it, watch it. So last but not least for this volume, let's go to it. So I've chosen the final scene from the beloved Christmas classic, It's a Wonderful Life. And the reason why is because it's just one of the most joyous, inspiring, happiest sequences and endings, I think, in cinema history, if not the best. And I don't think there's a single viewing that goes by every year where I at least don't smile from start to finish, or at least shed a tear at least once. And I don't cry often, but it's one of those films that does it for me because of just how inspiring that George Bailey character is, and just the message that the film conveys. And the ending ultimately shows that, how valuable life really is, you know, to family members, to the children, to the general society. And because it just created this imaginative fantasy element of an angel finding George and showing him what the world would be like if he never existed. He may have found his life worthless, but it just ultimately proved that everyone has a purpose in life, and I think that's something that I think the audience need to learn from. And I think the timing of when the film came out was crucial as well, because it was a year after the Second World War, and maybe it was something that the audience needed at the time, because obviously with so much devastation with the Second World War, it was something that I think people probably needed to see, to show that people do care about each other, people do love each other, and Christmas is probably the best time to be able to do that. And just when pretty much everyone in the entire town comes into George's house, and they end up celebrating with him by donating money and showing how much of an impact he's had on their lives, it just brings so much joy and happiness, it really does. And when you see that message from Clarence, which is in the book, saying no man is a failure who has friends, it's so true. You need people around you to be able to get through things in life. And you know, you might have one person or you might have 1,000 people. At the end of the day, it's about finding those particular people, and that's what I think is so special about the ending of that film. And the part that gets me the most is when Zuzu, the youngest daughter, innocently notices the bell jiggling on the tree and says,
Every time a bell rings, an angel gets his wings.
I mean, that's the innocence of a child believing that an angel does that. But to George, it's actually reality, because an angel does have his wings. So it is the innocence of childhood, but he actually completes that imagination on part of Zuzu, and then he just kind of gives her a hug and he says, "Attaboy, Clarence." And you know, it's just a wonderful moment, it really is. And then everyone starts singing, and that's it, and that's the end of the film. It just completes every single thing, and it just ticks every single box of what constitutes a happy and inspiring film. It's a Wonderful Life is a wonderful film. It really is. It's probably in my top 10 of all time. It always puts a smile on my face. It's just a classic. It got me into old school films. And Jimmy Stewart, rest in peace, one of my favourite actors, did an absolutely fantastic job as George, as did everybody else in the film too. So that's the first volume out of 4 completed. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please hit that like button and subscribe, and have a notification bell ticked every single time I upload a video, and I'll catch you in the next one.